you doing?
Good. Good morning, Mr. Bowden.
It's been a while.
It has. Good to see you.
Your expertise is in running and investing in internet media companies, right?
I think so, yes, sir.
And you've never prepared any kind of written valuation of an internet media business, right?
Give me a sense of context, please. What are you asking?
Yeah, let me, can I approach your honor?
Yes.
Turn to page 74.
Okay, got it.
Line 13.
Okay, got it. So I've never worked as an appraiser, like at writing an appraisal of a business. That's correct.
So you've never done like a formal valuation of an internet media business?
No, not in that sense, sir.
I guess one of the first things that you talked about today was you're not aware of anyone using traffic to value an internet media business. Is that right?
I said I was not. What I intended to say was I'm not aware of anybody using traffic as the primary driver of valuation.
But you're aware that Mr. Denton does use traffic as the primary valuer of a business, aren't you?
I know that Mr. Denton has said that he wants to grow traffic and he's happy to have more traffic, but I'm not aware that he's used it as a valuation, as the means of valuing the business.
And also is a metric that's used in terms of what revenues we derive from advertising. Not directly, no. When you invest in an entity, how do you determine whether it is working or not?
Usually audience is the measure that I look at first.
And how do you measure audience?
Currently through a service called Quantcast, formerly through a service called SiteMeter.
Did you review Mr. Denton's deposition before you rendered any opinions in this case?
Nope, did not.
So you weren't aware of that testimony?
I was not.
One of the entities that you were involved with is About.com, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And I think you talked about a sale of About.com.
Yes.
Do you remember when that was?
First time it was sold was spring of 2005.
And how much was it sold for?
$410 million.
Okay. And when was the second time it was sold?
August of 2012.
And what was it sold for?
$300 million.
There was a write-down of goodwill in that instance, wasn't there?
I believe there was, yes.
And the write-down of that goodwill was based on a drop in unique users, wasn't it?
It was based on a number of things, including slowdown of growth rate and lower financial performance, particularly lower revenue growth rate.
But it was also based on a drop in unique users, right?
If you say so.
Can you pull up Exhibit 100? Do you recall us looking at this exhibit at your deposition?
Yes.
And if you could go to the second page, Sean. Up near the top. And if you look in that paragraph there, the last sentence. There you go. The drop resulted in the New York Times having to adjust the value and make a goodwill write-down of About.com by $195 million, which is almost half of what they paid for it in 2005. You see that?
I see that, yes.
And the drop they're talking about in that instance is that first sentence, which says that ComScore has tracked their traffic for the past 8 months, and they recorded a drop from 61 million uniques to 52 million uniques. You see that?
I see that, But I don't basically can't accept it just based on this article. I would say this looks like the author's conclusion as to why they did it. I don't see anything here that says the New York Times said they did it for that reason.
But you don't disagree that their traffic dropped from 61 million uniques to 52 million uniques, do you?
Not at all, no.
Let's go to Exhibit D365. And I think you mentioned this at the end of your testimony, but before we zoom in on that, John, you agree with me that some posts are worth more than others, don't you?
When you say worth more, just give me a little clarity, please.
Right. Go to P81. Go to that first sentence. Would you agree with that statement by Mr.
Yes, I
Denton?
would. Yes, certainly.
Okay. Now let's go back to D365. And I think you referenced this in your testimony. You can go ahead and...
I'm sorry, I can't read what it is, so I don't know.
Go ahead and read on that. This is the monthly revenue for Gawker.com.
Yes, sir.
And I think you referenced this near the end of your testimony that in October of 2012, there was roughly $55,000 generated
Yep.
in revenue.
Yep.
For the site as a whole, is that right?
I'm sorry?
For the site as a whole, right?
For Gawker.com as a whole, yes.
And your review that you undertook in this case in terms of the revenue that you looked at, that ended November 1st of 2012, right?
Yes. Well, I looked for evidence after that, but pretty much the traffic to that post had ended by November 1st.
Okay. And your value at the end of the day was $10,970 of revenue that can be attributed to this post, right?
Yes, sir.
And so if we just did some quick math on here, of the total revenue for Gawker.com, this post generated 20% of it, right?
I'd probably argue that it's either 11,000 over the 2 million that the network as a whole got, or that it's like 8,000 over 55,000. So it's, but ballpark, sure, 15%.
15 to 20%.
Yeah.
Of the total revenue for the site, Gawker.com,
Yes.
was attributable to this one post.
Yes, sir.
So some posts are worth more than others, aren't they?
Sure.
And you're aware that Jeff Anderson rendered an opinion for us in this case, right?
Yes.
And I'm not going to go into detail with it, and the only thing I want to ask you is, do you remember that he attributed 5% of his value to this particular post?
Yes.
You attributed 20%, right?
Again, if we could, let's be precise. What I said was roughly 15 to 20% of Gawker.com's revenue in that 1 month was the result of this post. I did not make a comment on the contribution to the overall value of the business or anything else.
But the value you looked at in this case was revenue, right?
Yes.
And of the revenue value that you looked at, this post was 20% of it, right?
Of that 1 month, yes.
Let's go to, John, can you please pull up 122? Let's start at the second page. And this is an email from Mr. Denton from October 13th of 2012. It says, have a thought, if there were 3 stories over the years that defined your site, what would they be? You see that?
I do.
Can you go up to Mr. Delario's email? Mr. Delario's response on October 15th, 2012, which is 11 days after the post that's at issue in this case, is Hogan initial post. You see that?
I see it says Hogan initial post may work to or max.
So you'd agree with me that a post that defined a website is extremely valuable, isn't it?
Actually, no, I would not agree with you. First of all, this is, I'll say, a relatively casual email exchange. It's not scientific. just talking about what, what I think is good. But so I don't know if I go from Nick, Mr. Denton and Mr. Delario talking about what might define the website as saying, okay, that actually had any effect on the overall value.
Are you reading their minds now? Is that what you're doing?
No, I'm refusing to read their minds. I'm saying I can't read their minds.
You don't know what they were thinking, right?
Right.
You can only go based on the words that are in this email, in which Mr. Denton asked his people that work for him for a post that defined their website, and the editor-in-chief of Gawker.com said Hogan post, right? That's all we have. Black and
Well,
white.
actually, can we go back to the question, please?
Yeah. You go back to that second page.
Yeah. Like I said,
words, right?
Yeah, right. But it's like this is like the kind of thing guys ask each other over beer. Who is the best running back? It's
Okay, but this wasn't over beer, right? This was in an email inside the company, wasn't it?
I have no idea. It's like this is your thing. You tell me.
You didn't project any future traffic for Gawker.com in this case, did you?
I did not.
And you didn't make any revenue projections for Gawker.com, did you?
I did not. No, I did not.
You didn't consider any potential future revenue sources in reaching your opinions in this case, did you?
Only to the extent I looked at the potential for repeat visitation as a result of this post.
You didn't find any, did you?
I did not.
So that value really wasn't a part of your opinions, was it?
It was not.
And you didn't make any forecasts or projections in connection with your opinions in this case, did you?
No, that was not part of my scope of assignment.
So when we're talking about the word commercial benefit, no projections of future revenue, income streams, revenue sources, none of that was taken into consideration in your opinions, right?
No, it was not.
You only considered advertising revenue.
I did.
So you didn't consider any increase in value of the Gawker brand as part of your opinions, right?
No.
And I think when Mr. Berry was going through the charts with you, he was talking about that extremely complicated math that you had done. You remember that?
Yep.
The reason that you had to do that math was because Gawker didn't keep the data that would have told you specifically the information you were trying to obtain there, did it?
Yeah, I did not have access to very precise data, so I had to build a model on my own.
Well, they didn't keep any data tracking how many users went from one post to another post to another post, right?
Not to the best of my knowledge, no, sir.
Yes.
I would argue that it's a calculation, not a guess.
But you don't have the actual underlying data itself, right?
I've got traffic data from syndicated research that looks at where the flows were from Gawker to other sites, which is what most decisions in the business are based on.
That's based on the post as a whole for the
That's on the site as a whole.
entirety, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So that would include things like cat videos.
I'm sorry?
That would include things like cat videos. If somebody went to the site, that 55% drop rate that you were talking about earlier, that would apply to people that went to watch a cat video.
If there were such things, sure.
And it would go to people who went to watch slideshows, right?
I don't believe there are slideshows, but
You're not aware of there being slideshows on some of the Gawker sites?
I'm not, but that doesn't say I'm not aware of that.
Again, you didn't read Mr. Denton's deposition, right?
I did not.
One of the things that I wanted to talk about, do you have your report in front of you?
Yes, I do. Sure.
Go to page 17.
Give me a moment. Okay, got it.
At the bottom of page 17, it says, this is your writing in your report. Gawker's made a management decision to be very selective about what advertisers it allows on its site. And unlike many online publishers, it does not work with outside ad networks. As a result, Gawker often publishes pages without any advertising at all when the number of pages exceeds available ad inventory. This means that Gawker's RPM during this period was on the lower end of the range of its peer group. Is that what you wrote?
Yes, sir.
So Gawker makes a conscious decision to undersell advertising, doesn't it?
I would argue they make a decision to prioritize a certain type of editorial environment, which includes not running what they would call lower quality ads.
So they make a decision to forego some revenue in order to make that editorial decision,
Yes, sir.
right? And other sites don't make that same decision. They maximize their revenue, right?
Yes, sir.
And so Gawker has potential sources of revenue that they haven't tapped into. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
One of the things I think, and we mentioned on this before, but you focused your analysis of the 2012 revenue from this post to prior to October 1st of 2012, right?
Yes.
And I think you may have mentioned this in passing when you were talking about, but that was Hurricane Sandy came November.
Yeah, that was
2012.
I want to say it was Halloween, like October of 12, yeah.
And are you aware that the servers went down?
I had heard that. I don't have any special knowledge of it, but I heard that, yeah.
I want you to assume the servers went down. And can you bring that slide up, John?
I feel like assuming in a courtroom is dangerous, but okay.
Go to that peak, those peaks, please. Zoom in on the area that you filled in. There we go. Okay. You had mentioned something about an inflection point where traffic keeps going up, right?
Yep.
And if you assume that around Halloween, which would be October 31st, Hurricane Sandy came in and knocked out the servers, the traffic went down, and then they had time to get back up. If we were to take that out of the equation...
How long am I assuming the servers went down, please?
Let's assume that... Let's just look at this little gap right here. That traffic continues to go up if we take that abrupt drop out of the equation, does it not?
If we're assuming Hurricane Sandy happened, as a news organization, I would say the counterbalancing force is that a lot of folks are very interested in Hurricane Sandy. They were discussing it. And so while there'd be a down spike because of the servers going out, there's also all the news sites turned a lot more pages because everybody wanted to know what was going on.
Would people typically go to Gawker for Hurricane Sandy news? Or would they go to traditional news sites, weather sites?
People go to a lot of different sites. It's like they certainly look for the weather forecast on weather.com or the news, but there are different takes on the story, how it affects people.
So are you aware of any instances in which people went to Gawker.com for information about Hurricane Sandy?
Not specifically, no, sir.
And in terms of the time period that you looked at, you did not look at whether traffic steadily increased at Gawker.com from 2010 all the way through 2015. Is that right?
I looked principally at the time frame in which this appeared. 2010 was too early to be relevant, and for a post where the traffic decayed within 2 weeks, there wasn't reason to look much beyond November, maybe December.
So would the answer to my question be yes?
Yes.
And actually, you considered looking at that broader time period irrelevant to your opinions, didn't you?
I will say I scanned the traffic patterns more broadly, but I specifically focused on this one area.
Let's go to your deposition, page 129.
Okay, got it.
I'm going to read starting at line 11.
I'm sorry, what line are you on, please, Mr. Vogt?
11. Okay.
Okay,
The
gotcha.
question I asked you was, as we sit here today, you can't tell me whether over the course of 2010 to January of 2015 there was a steady increase in traffic at Gawker.com. And your answer was, it's irrelevant. In my opinion, whether there was an increase in traffic over that period of time unless it was specifically attributable to this video. Right?
Yes, sir.
And then you explained that the video ran in that time period we've been talking about, disappeared after November 1st, right?
Yes.
So you didn't look at that long time period at all?
No.
You have no way of knowing whether someone who came to Gawker's site interested in Terry Bollea, had never been there before, looked at this, may have come back 2 or 3 months later. You have no way of knowing that, right?
No, no one does.
Just from that exposure to the Gawker brand, right?
That's correct.
You reviewed...
But by the way, if I may, in a sense, I made the opposite assumption when we started. I assumed that all of the 5 million people that came the first time were new visitors. Okay. I didn't discount, some of those came before.
Okay. And so with all those new visitors that you assume for your opinions, you have no way of knowing whether they came back, a week later, 2 weeks later, 3 months later, right?
No, but I know that there wasn't a significant increase in traffic after the post decayed.
Okay. And you reviewed some financials in this case, right?
Yes, mostly the Gawker media income statements.
And we went through some of those financials in your deposition. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And we had talked about the fact that from 2012 to 2013, revenue grew at Gawker.com 13.7%. Is that right?
I can check my report, but that sounds about right.
And then we also discussed the fact that there were projections for 2014, that from 2013 to 2014, the growth rate was going to be 80%, wasn't it?
Well, was it actual or was that a projection?
It was a projection. You recall that?
I recall discussion about projections, yes. As I recall, it didn't come true.
You have no idea how much revenue Gawker generated from sponsored content in 2013?
Not specifically, no. But my understanding is it's within the advertising line, which was the 21 or 22 million of the total.
John, let's go back to We've kind of been talking about this a lot during the case, but you and I went through this at your deposition. You remember that?
Yep.
And one of the things that Mr. Denton says in his memo that's referenced in this piece is that U.S. Monthly Uniques is the figure journalists cite when they're judging a site's competitive position. That's an accurate statement, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
And if you pull up P108, this is a publication that's put out by ComScore. You remember us going through this at your deposition?
Yep, sure.
And this is a ranking of the top 50 U.S. digital media properties for September of 2014. Is that right?
It looks like a slice of it, but yeah.
And what's the metric that they use to rank the top 50 digital media properties?
This is a ranking of audience.
Uniques, right?
Yes.
And if you go to the second page, John. Second page. Sorry. Look at number 44.
Got it.
Who's number 44?
Gawker Media.
Ahead of New York Times Digital, right?
Yep.
And ahead of Netflix, right?
Yes.
If we go back to P81, page 2, John. The first two, please highlight the first sentence. The first sentence of the second paragraph. And the third sentence. Do you remember us talking about how, when we talked about the target being U.S. Monthly Uniques, we talked about the fact that it's the one that journalists cite when judging a site's competitive position, but we also talked about how it's the metric by which advertisers decide which sites they will shower with dollars. You remember us talking about that?
Yes.
And you agree with that as well, didn't you?
I agree with the first part of it. The second part Nick's colorful phrasing aside, there's not a direct correlation between more traffic and more dollars. It's an imprecise correlation.
But, and I think you said it's overly simplistic, right?
Yes.
And then what you did is you went on to explain that advertisers look at a ranker, right?
That's one of the things that they use to kind of get a list of who to talk to.
And can you explain to the jury what that is?
Sure. So advertisers, there's thousands and thousands of websites, and it's okay, who should we look at? And so what they would often do is say, okay, we want to advertise to women aged between 25 and 49 in these parts of the country. And they'll tell their advertising group, okay, give me a list of all those sites. And so in a lot of cases, having a certain critical mass of audience gets you invited to the party. You get to talk to the advertiser about a contract. Doesn't mean you get the contract, but it means you at least get invited to the party.
Right. It gets your foot in the door with advertisers, right?
Yes, sure.
And that's based on uniques, where those sites are ranked within those demographic categories.
Again, that is one of the factors. I mean, it's not like, oh, just get on this list and you're automatically invited. They've got preferences based on, do they know the site? What's the perceived quality of the site? Is it specific? Is it a food site and I've got a food product, or a car and it's a car site? There's a lot of things that go into it, but that's one of them.
But the first step in getting through the door with advertisers is being on the ranker by having a lot of unique users,
Sure,
right?
sure.
You agree that a site with plenty of uniques has good growth prospects, don't you?
No?
Let's go to page 175 of your deposition. I'm going to read the question at line 9.
Sorry, slow down just a half a sec, please. Okay, gotcha. So line 9.
It says, and I stated to you, Mr. Denton says, finally, a site with plenty of genuine uniques is one that has good growth prospects. And I asked you, do you agree with that statement? And you said, sure, right?
Sure, okay, yes.
That was your answer, just sure.
No, and I will say, having heard you read it back to me, there's a lot of sites, Yahoo has a lot of uniques, but no one would think it has good growth prospects at the moment. So that's something I'm hitching on.
But you didn't say that in your deposition, right?
It didn't occur to me at the time.
And did you read your deposition?
Yes.
And you got an errata sheet to make any corrections that you needed to? Did you correct that answer?
I did not.
And then you, if we stay there, I asked you as well about Mr. Denton going on to say each of the first-time visitors is a potential convert. You agree with that statement as well, correct?
Yes, sure.
And by potential convert, that means you've now exposed that first-time visitor to the site, and they may become a long-time user, right?
Sure, yeah.
One of the things that we spoke about at your deposition was, you had mentioned earlier today that at IAC, you were involved with Ask.com, right?
Yes.
And your boss there was Barry
Diller, yep.
Diller. And you remember we spoke about a rather large ad campaign that Ask had in 2007. The purpose of that campaign was to drive traffic to the site, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And we had talked about it being a multi-million-dollar campaign, right?
Yes.
It was a $100 million campaign, wasn't it?
That's what the story said. Barry might have said that in the press. It wasn't a $100 million campaign.
Barry was your boss, wasn't he?
Yes.
And he said publicly it was a $100 million campaign?
Yep.
And that advertising campaign got almost no uniques, right? It was a train wreck?
Yep.
And in this case, this video drove 5.3 million uniques to Gawker. I mean, you've assumed that is true for purposes of your opinions, right?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Rank, I just have a few questions. Mr. Vogt asked you quite a lot of information, a lot of questions in a very short time period. Did anything that y'all discussed change your opinion in this case?
No.
One of the things that he mentioned to you was the errata sheet that you signed after your deposition. Did you understand with that errata sheet that you were supposed to correct transcription errors or change your testimony?
I thought I was just looking for typos and transcription errors, is my understanding of what I was supposed to do.
John, if you could pull up that ComScore data that we're looking for. So Mr. Vogt asked you about that. If you could turn to the second page with Gawker Media and just zero in on line 44. So not to advertise Gawker Media here, but Gawker Media does pretty good on ComScore, right?
Of course, sure.
Is this Gawker.com or all of the websites?
My understanding is it's all of Gawker Media together, because their peers are other networks that have multiple sites on that list.
If we were just to look at Gawker.com, how far down the list would it be?
100 and something, maybe well off the list, be way down the list.
Mr. Vogt asked you about a couple of these different companies that you were involved with that sold. One was, I think the first was About.com.
Yes, sir.
And there was a discussion about some press reports about About.com.
Yep.
It looked to me like there was more you wanted to say when he was questioning you. Why did the value drop?
So there are 2 or 3 reasons. At the time when we sold it the first time, the company was growing at 40% a year, year on year. And most companies get a premium when they're growing really, really fast. By the time we tried to buy it, and I tried to buy it back, so I wasn't negative on the prospects, the company had slowed down. But it was actually significantly more profitable, but at that point it was being valued as a more mature company. It was being valued on its profits. And it sold like a mature company at 7.5 times its profits.
And when you talk about the growth in the first time it sold, was growth, revenue, profit, growth rates, the thing you talked about before?
Yes, it was growing. The revenue was growing at 40% per year.
And by the time you went to buy it back, the revenue, profits, and growth rate, the revenue and profits were up, but the growth rate was way down.
Yes.
And is there anything about About.com's valuation at that point that's at all comparable to Gawker.com?
It's the same 3 key issues of, what's the revenue, what's the profitability, what's the growth rate. So at the time when we sold it, it was not only growing at 40% a year, it had a 50% profit margin. When we tried to buy it back, the growth rate had obviously slowed quite a bit.
At the end, Mr. Vogt was asking you some questions about Ask.com.
Yes.
What business was Ask.com in again?
It was a search engine.
Is that the same as Gawker?
Oh, dramatically different.
So why were you advertising at that point for Ask.com?
Okay. And it goes back to something that I was talking about earlier, is that it's not just the traffic, but it's the ability to monetize the traffic. In the case of Ask, we had a really good contract with Google to monetize our search traffic, and a point of market share in the search business was worth about $1 billion. And so we knew if we could drive more traffic, there was a very direct correlation to more revenue and more value creation.
So because it's a search engine like Google, Yahoo, these kinds of things, if you can attract just even a small percentage of people to your site, it sounds like it has dramatic impact on the bottom line.
It does.
Mr. Vogt had started some of his questioning by talking about, I think, what you called the bounce rate, how many people went to Gawker.com and then went off to another site. And I think the series of questions suggested that maybe the Hogan post, for lack of a better word, it was stickier. People stuck around more than they would other sites. If that's true, if more people stuck around on Gawker after seeing the Hogan post,
yes.
How does that change your analysis?
Well, first, I would say, I wouldn't agree with the first premise that the Hogan post was materially different than everything else on the site. Again, they ran 10,000 posts that year. This is not, it was successful, but it wasn't in character or quality different than all the rest of them.
But just assume that that's right, and people come to the post, stay on Gawker.com in unusual droves. How would that change the bottom line?
Okay, so basically I would add 20%. Let's assume the bounce rate was half. So instead of 55%, it was 28%. So I would add kind of that much more. So instead of, like I said, I came up with an estimate of about $11,000, and so let's say it was $15,000. It's like, but you get to 20,000, you've sort of taken every guess and said, all right, assume it's the other way, and you get to 20,000. But it's not some material. It's like I said, 10 to 20,000 doesn't change it more than that.
So even if 100% of the people who went to the Hogan Post stayed on Gawker.com, you're still in a range of $12,000 to $20,000
Yes.
at most?
Yeah.
Mr. Vogt also asked you about Mr. Anderson's report, and I don't want to get into the details of that. But his ultimate premise was that there was long-term growth to Gawker.com as a result of the Hogan Post. Is that correct?
That it was his premise? Yes.
Well, that was his premise correct?
No.
Why not?
And that was, it goes back to a question Mr. Vogt asked me about, well, what happened to traffic over a 5-year period? And the scope of my assignment wasn't, did Gawker's traffic grow? It was, did Gawker's traffic grow because it ran...
We'll pick up it. Just like, John, if you could just bring up that chart. If you could just zoom in on that October through the end of the year. Okay. So Mr. Vogt had asked you about this Quantcast chart, and you and I talked about it a little bit with respect to repeat revenue. Looking at this chart, what happened to Gawker's traffic from the October 2012 point where the Hogan Post went up through the time that the video remained on the site?
When it went, the entire period where it was up?
Just from October 2012 through April 2013, which is what's on this chart.
Traffic was basically flat, kind of, I'll call it a trading range.
Okay. And so looking at this, what does that tell you about the effect of the Hogan Post on Gawker's traffic during this time period?
That there was no significant change in the traffic patterns as a result of this article.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
to the Gawker site and brand derived from the viral Hogan article video posted by Gawker?
Okay. I looked relatively specifically at, I'll say, the traffic of the site and how that turned into revenue. Because so first of all, again, in my opinion, Gawker was an ongoing business. They published 10,000 articles a year. They had traffic. And so it wasn't like the site had been around for 10 years. And so the thing I was trying to figure out was, whether it's just awareness or links as a result of this post change the traffic to the site and how that translated into revenue. And so I didn't have any way to say, oh, the overall awareness increased or longer term, but I also didn't have any reason to think that there had been a change in that awareness.
So kind of distilling that down, you didn't really have an opinion as to whether or not brand awareness changed?
No, sir.
Right?
Correct.
And the reason was because it was well-known brand already?
I don't know how well it was or was not known. It had been around for 10 years. It had a fair amount of traffic. That's.
Do Fortune 500 companies exclude international visitors to ad compensation calculation?
Yes.
Is the Gawker Facebook site tied into any calculation used?
Indirectly, yes, because how it would work is when the story is posted on Facebook, somebody sees it and says, okay, that's an interesting story. I want to click on that and go through to Gawker.com. So it would have been a source of traffic into Gawker where I would have captured it when it arrived on the site.
Just want to make sure I understand what you said. Your analysis already bakes in any revenue that's derived from people coming through Facebook?
Yes, yes.
And I think your response was primarily about whether or not someone who may have seen the post on Facebook from Gawker then clicked and went directly to the site, right?
That is correct.
People could have liked that story, and then it would have appeared on their Facebook pages, right?
They could have shared it and it would have appeared on their Facebook page, yeah.
So then all their friends would have seen Gawker's name as well when it was shared, right?
Would have seen the name, yes, but if their friends had then clicked on that story, that would have shown up in the traffic numbers for Gawker.
So that post being up there helped expand the advertisement of Gawker's name, correct?
Maybe a little bit.
Traffic run rate before spikes appears lower than traffic run rate after spikes. Is this correct?
Yes, but most of the growth happened before the article ran. If you remember that kind of bluish chart, where you saw was the traffic increased like in the spring through the summer, and it came up to the higher level before October 1st. And then if you said, okay, chop it there and look October 1st forward, then it's in that kind of flat range.
Do you know whether or not prior to the Hogan post, the Kate Middleton post had anything to do with that increase?
I know the Kate Middleton post, which was in September,
Right.
was quite successful as well.
You said Gawker is a spike-driven business, so that means they need to generate those spikes, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
How do you value brand awareness, recognition, reputation, and, quote, buzz, end quote, in media from article spikes?
To some extent, like when I think about investing in a company or buying a company, if a company is very popular, well-known, everybody's talking about it, you'll pay a little bit more for it, absolutely. But to some extent, what has to happen is that awareness and interest it's got to turn up into traffic, turn up into revenue. It's not just, oh, people are talking about it, but it's actually got to become business at some point. And it's like, and so really, that's where I put a value on, is when it turns up as traffic to the site and revenue.
When other sites link to Gawker articles, what does that mean in terms of value?
Interesting question. Because there's a lot of value that a site gets when other sites link to it. So one of the ways sites gets traffic is by their rank within Google. You know, when we do a search, does it show up towards the top of the list? And links in are one of the things that Google places a value on. So if a reputable site, if the New York Times links to your site, then you tend to show up more highly within the Google search results. So that's one of the ways that it has value. You get more traffic directly, and over time with the links, you tend to have more prestige within the search engines.
Isn't it like the, I'm sorry,
I just want to follow up on something you said there about Google.
Yes, sir.
If you can take a look at this exhibit, minus 18. This is our search.
Sorry?
We've been here a while. Is this what you were talking about?
I'm sorry, Mr. Vogt. What are you doing here?
If you look here, there's a spike right around the time of the Hogan post.
Yes.
And this is actually a Google search for the word Gawker.
Yep.
Is that what you were talking about?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Rand, just want to follow up that.
Yep.
Do you know when that spike occurred?
Again, the time scale's cut off here. It was around the first half of October.
Do you know if that was when the post went up or when Mr. Galea filed this lawsuit?
From the looks of it, the first spike is when the post went up. The second spike is when Mr. Belay would have filed the lawsuit around October 15th.
And your numbers on revenue would include any traffic that's drawn from Google, right?
Oh, certainly.
isn't it likely that after the post, companies were more apt to buy ads on Gawker Media due to growth in traffic, especially during the holidays?
No, for three reasons. First reason is that, this post went up in the middle of October. By that point, all of the holiday ad budgets had been long spent. So then the next period where there would have been sort of in the time window would have been Q1, which is historically a very, very soft market for ads. So there really was very little opportunity. Second thing is that, frankly, this is the type of post that scares off more advertisers than it attracts. Advertisers are very, very sensitive to being around not suitable for work content because they want their brands to be in a certain type of environment. So if anything, I think this would have kind of scared folks away. And the third thing is, again, I never saw any evidence of an increase in traffic.
And this last one probably connects to another one, but looking at the chart, you don't see any overall growth?
No. I'm looking for a chart, but no.
No question.
I know there were, one of the juror questions wanted, could there be dialogue? There's no procedure for dialogue between the witness and the jury. All right. Any other juror questions?
People are writing.
Okay, all right. Thank you all very much. So now what we're going to do is take a lunch break, and please come back at